Good morning to America, to YouTube, to my EDFO 420 class at Ball State University. Today we're just going to be talking a little bit about our Myth 32 from 50 Myths and Lies about about the American education system. So today, Myth 32 is about American schooling, K through 12, being dumbed down for students. So, first off, throughout the chapter, it talks a lot about today's children. So, according to the book, it says today's children, they're just very in school. In school, they are very materialistic, they're less attentive, and they're poorly behaved and disrespectful of elders. And some of the reason that I feel that schools are this way is mainly based on all of the attention that has gone into students over the years in those schools. Because as an elementary education major, we are really having to pay attention to all of our students in classes rather than back in the day whenever they are saying there were smarter kids, but in that case there were smarter kids based on there was more attention put towards other kids than the ones that are falling behind. So that kind of leads me into my review on my own self in school, in elementary school and middle school and high school, because all of these are very necessary to take into consideration if we're talking how school K through 12 is being dumbed down. So whenever I was in elementary school, there was a lot of focus on all of your subjects, obviously, and it never really seemed like anybody was put above the line, put below the line, but we didn't have a lot of diversity either, and we didn't have a whole lot of disabilities in our classroom. So everybody was kind of on the same track. Like, I come from a smaller town called Bedford, Indiana, and there's not a whole lot of people. There weren't a whole lot of kids in my school at the time. I think by the time I graduated 5th grade, we had about 26, 27, 28 people in our class. Then we got into middle school, numbers started bumping up because all of these elementary schools started going into 3 separate middle schools, and things got a little different, but they were also able to set us on different tracks in different classes based on where they saw our test scores, how we were doing in class, and just different areas like that. And then we went into high school and things got even more broken down. So by broken down, I just mean separating the slower students compared to the ones that are on a faster track. So that pretty much, on a quick note, that pretty much sums up like all of my schooling from K through 12. I never felt left behind, and we even had like resource rooms that helped students who needed that help to stay along with the rest of the class. So my next point is, in our reading, Charles Sykes in 1995 says that the younger generation is dumbed down based on and compared to prior generations. So kind of like at this time, I just want to leave about 10 seconds for you to kind of like think in your mind and just like, what are your thoughts or ideas to what Sykes was using to support his theory of education being responsible for a flight from high academic standards. So just quick, think about that in your mind a little bit. Take note of that, whatever you want to think about up to this point. And then we're going to go into kind of what his thoughts were whenever he said that the younger generation was being dumbed down compared to prior generations. So Sykes says self-esteem was more put before school skills. So school skills such as your actual subject areas. And it's just saying like, we're focused more on how a child feels rather than how a student is academically achieving. So he kind of goes by a quote, Johnny can't read or write, but at the end, he feels good about himself. Now, generally, whenever I hear this quote, at least whenever I read this chapter, it was kind of a different thought process because as an elementary ed major, I'm very sympathetic. I'm very open to how everyone feels rather than my own thoughts on one critical area. So I think that at least in an elementary like setting, and it keeps going on through middle school and high school, but this is a good time that we need to set self-esteem ahead, because whenever students are frustrated, whenever students are not understanding the material, they just want to give up. And they're not giving up because they're not good at it. They're giving up because they aren't getting any like reinforcement to help them push forward or like push to be academically successful. And I mean, all teachers can carry this out from K all the way up to 12. But to a certain extent, you've always got that curriculum that you need to follow. And so this brings us to the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. So he talks about accountability, testing, and standards. And it's more based on how we kind of look at our kids and just kind of like help push them forward along the way. And this still kind of goes into my self-esteem. Like, self-esteem needs to come first in order to help push kids further and further down the line, because there's different ways to get students engaged. There's different ways that all students learn. And as an upcoming like new teacher, we've got to examine all these different areas rather than just like back in the day whenever there was one certain way to teach. And that kind of made things a whole lot more difficult to distribute across the whole entire classroom. So as the No Child Left Behind Act, you're kind of going into more spreading the wealth across the classroom and not focusing on a general 5 students rather than your general 25 students. So it's more based on not leaving a child behind. So kind of, I wrote my own like thought process on this whole thing of like, and whenever I wrote it, it really didn't make sense, but I'm going to see if like I can kind of adapt it into a better way that it does make sense. So what my thoughts are that like students in the older generation had more focus on less people. So more children were left behind because you were only focusing on one certain way to teach and one certain way to get students into basically just doing worksheets. And it wasn't like that for all teachers, obviously, because like I've seen all up to this point, I've seen all the films like through all my classes, and it's like they're only showing us all the films that are keeping students engaged to teachers' lessons, but what they're not showing us are all what we shouldn't do. And I think that's a good thing, but I also think it's a bad thing because that's always going to be common in schools is the wrong way of doing things. And then my other point was students in younger generations have more students being focused on and less content being distributed because you're trying to spread your content around the whole classroom and not leaving a child behind. So this kind of goes about a point to that student aids are necessary in schools, but we're not getting the right, what's the word I'm looking for? We're just not getting the money to support all of that in our classrooms. So you're leaving 30 students up to one teacher to distribute all of that content, and it's just not, I feel like the reason we are not getting all of the content distributed to enough kids and the reason that we have a dumber generation is because we don't have the resources. We don't have the money. We don't have enough to move forward. So we're trying to do too much with too little. Let's see. Then we kind of got to, my next point was a little based on standardized testing. So to me, standardized testing like SAT, ACT, all your I steps, all your I reads now, I learns, they're just not completely accurate. And it's based on different students' ways of learning. Like, students don't learn well through worksheets. Students don't learn well unless they are engaged. So unless you can actually engage them in some kind of like standardized testing, you can't leave a student's choices up to little bubbles just to know what goes through their minds because they're not always completely accurate. And so my question that kind of goes along with this, and I'm going to leave about 10 seconds up to you to kind of let all of this go through your mind and just think about it a little. So should we continue to consider these standardized tests so like intimately based on intelligence? So just take a quick second and process that through your mind, pause the video, do whatever you need to do to write this down. So next in the chapter, we kind of get to a section where it's saying students from older generations, like some students through the 70s, 80s, and 2000s weren't exactly considered dumber, rather than they were more academically ambitious due to the opportunity rising. So 70s, there was a little bit of engagement. Up through 80s, 90s, 2000s, we started to process new ways that children were learning, and we figured out a lot up to that point. So it's